Wait a minute, Dad. I haven't finished Dick Tracy.
You can't read.
Okay, read to me.
Oh, okay. Now, let's see. Tracy's trapped by the crooks. Gee, he's in a real tough spot.
Boy, I'll draw my Dick Tracy snub-nose 38, and I'll... See that shooting shell, Dad? Fires screening stick-em caps, too.
Well, let's get back.
Then I'll pull back the bolt, and I'll blast my way out with Mattel's Dick Tracy Tommy Burst. You can fire a whole burst of caps, or shoot one at a time.
I thought you wanted to read Dick Tracy.
Not now. I think he's on television.
No batteries, no caps. That Thunderbird looks like real, sounds like real. It even vibrates like real. It's safe to play with. Just flip up the sight, pull back the bolt, and fire.
We have an active shooter. We have an active shooter inside the warehouse.
A new portrait is emerging of the man who murdered 49 people in an Orlando nightclub.
17 people killed in a mass shooting at a Florida high school.
A deadly mass shooting. The deadliest mass shooting in this country in 12 days.
That deadly mass shooting in a Southern California bar and country music venue. The Ventura County Sheriff says a gunman opened fire inside as it was crowded with more than 100 people.
We've endured too many of these tragedies in the past few years. We can't accept events like this as routine. Are we really prepared to say that we're powerless?
I'm scared.
I'm scared. I'm scared. I'm scared.
I'm scared. I don't want to be scared.
I don't want to be scared. I don't want to be scared.
I don't want to be scared.
I don't want to be scared.
I don't want to be scared.
Studies, including those by the FBI, show mass killings have tripled in the past few years. In the U.S., firearms are the preferred weapons, but killers have also used trucks filled with fertilizer. And in 2001 in New York, airplanes. There have been enough mass killings that psychologists were able to put together a profile of these murderers.
What I think causes mass shootings is the person and the gun, not one or the other. If something's happened to them in their past, they maybe had a bad childhood, or they have someone that bullies them. That possibly could drive them to want to do something like this, which is like horrific and terrible. You really don't know what's going on in someone's head. You really don't know what's going on at home. You don't know anything about a lot of people, and a lot of people's thoughts is stuff that you would never think that person would think. Maybe it's because they have like a problem with their mind or something like traumatic has happened to them.
I believe that in our society we tend to scapegoat those with mental illness as the ones who are committing these violent acts because it is comfortable to do so. I think that it separates us, right? Those people that we call quote unquote crazy, the ones that, those who are suffering with from homelessness, or those that we might see on the streets talking to an invisible companion. It's easy to say that person is quote unquote crazy. They're different than me. And it is kind of comforting to be able to walk around in the world and have a sense of control and safety. The statistic is that 95% of crimes are committed by people that you would assume are quote-unquote normal. That is a very scary thought.
Well, I think when we look at mass shooters, when you look at them, the overwhelming majority are male. I think the ones that people fear most, though, are the ones where it's a stranger who perpetrates the mass shooting. You have no warning. You could just be out at a mall and then somebody just decides to start randomly shooting, and you can be victimized.
What we see is a common trend in a lot of violent individuals. Typically they are suffering from some type of trauma in their lifetime, whether that be physical abuse, sexual abuse, mental abuse. We're seeing a lot of that abuse in violent individuals.
And in those cases, there's actually no single age. I mean, while they're overwhelmingly male who do that, there's no real single age demographic or even racial demographic that describes these people. It's really hard to pin down the very specific things that make those people unique, and that's unfortunate. So not everybody leaves behind manifestos, but some shooters have left writings behind. In some cases, it definitely appears to be be inspired by copycat effects where they are trying to go out in a blaze of glory, like trying to get as much attention as they can.
We find that these individuals typically have more in common than they do in terms of differences.
There's a really very small percentage of people who are violent towards others and are also concurrently diagnosed with mental illness. What we know is that sane people are going into churches and schools and planning these attacks. People that are considered insane, quote unquote, are not in their sound mind and could technically not plan something for a year or longer for how they're going to do this.
The Las Vegas shooting, there were like thousands of people in that crowd. So there was, the people who were shot and then the people who were killed, but then there's those thousands of people who were also in that crowd who were running for their lives, and I'm sure that it has profoundly affected them in all the kinds, when they go out in public spaces, they're probably always looking over their shoulder. So I think that's something that needs to be talked about more. I have been asked by some reporters, well, it's got to be the video games. And it's like, well, I come from Canada, and I can tell you that the teenagers there are playing exactly the same video games as American kids are. They're watching exactly the same movies as American kids are. And yet Canada doesn't have nearly the per capita problem of these kinds of tragedies as in the US. So clearly it is not the video games and it's not the violent movies. It is something else. There aren't too many serial killers anymore. Like when you think about it, when was the last time you've heard about, it's not like they're non-existent, but when you go back to like the 70s and 80s, there were actually a lot of serial killers. Serial killers were, it was still rare, but it seems that mass shooters have kind of supplanted the serial killer kind of dynamic, and it's unclear why. Other developed countries have socialized medicine, and so there's greater access to mental health resources, for example. So I think that while certainly firearms definitely play a role, it's not just as easy as just saying it's the guns.
Pathway to violence that's been studied by the FBI and people like Dr. Malloy. What we're seeing in the pathway to violence is that we see an aggressive approach towards a certain target. Usually as they reach that target, when they're targeted violence, whether it's women or children or a certain race or religion, when we see that target, early onset behaviors, usually the violence isn't geared towards that target. Usually that violence is more towards animals or just, random people. And so early on, we can see some aggressive behaviors towards people who aren't the target, but really they're motivated by their target.
In 1996, Congress passed what's called the Dickey Amendment that basically cut off funding for firearm violence research to the Centers for Disease Control, and actually in general. Jay Dickey was the congressperson, I believe, from Alabama, who was the person who originally sponsored the bill in 1996. And in 2015, he had since retired. He wrote to Congress and said, you know what? I now regret that I had sponsored this bill, because if, 20 years, over this past 20 years, research had been done, we wouldn't have this problem with firearm violence that we have in America. So he writes this letter to Congress. The day after he wrote that letter, the San Bernardino shooting happened. The day after the San Bernardino shooting happened, Congress convened and voted once again to continue the Dickey Amendment.
2018 was the deadliest school year that we'd ever seen. More deaths happened on campus, more violence happened on campus, more weapons were brought on campus, all of these things. We've never seen this type of violence before on school campuses. You're not going to stop all shootings. You're not going to stop all violence. You're not going to stop a lot of things in this world, but you can prevent a lot.
And most Americans aren't aware that there really is basically no funding for firearms. Like, I could get funding on pretty much anything I can think of, any public health problem I can think of. I can apply for federal funding for me to research that. This is one of the only things that you cannot get federal funding to research. And yet I think most Americans would agree that it is an issue that needs to be addressed in America, but there's almost no people quantifying it. And I think it's very, very unfortunate.
I think that we can create change in the community by stop these things that are happening. So, like the things that are driving people to do this, like bullying, we have to try to stop that. I know schools do that, but they're kind of lenient on it. Like I know my school is. Like they don't really pay attention to it. And also like home, like when you're at home, you don't always know what's going on in someone else's life. They could be having something that no one knows about. And sometimes they don't report it because they're too scared. If we could stop that, that'd be great too. And I think it would help everyone and everything around us.
The motive and the major influencer for why a sane person would commit such crimes is really rooted in community and issues related to separation, racism, hate, unprocessed anger. And so those are conversations that we're not having as a society. We're talking about, oftentimes a lot of politics looks at connecting mental illness to these mass shootings as opposed to really addressing the issue that as a society we're having a lot of division and we're not talking about it. As a person who works with those struggling with their mental health, what I always recommend is that if you're feeling like you might be struggling with depression or anxiety, or there's something going on in your mental and emotional state that is negatively impacting your ability to live your life the way that you would hope, go out and get support, talk to someone, reach out to your school counselor, reach out to a parent, a friend. There's a lot of help available to you, so I would encourage you to reach out.
We need change. We need change.
We need change. We need change.
We need change.
Let's make a change. Let's make a change.
Let's make a change. Let's make a change.
Let's make a change.
Let's make a change. Let's make a change.
Let's make a change.